Seaside, everyone, and welcome to Seaside Shadows Cemetery Saturday. And today we are in Cedar Grove Cemetery in New London, Connecticut. So that means we have traveled all the way from Northwest Connecticut, where we were for last cemetery Saturday, down here to Southeast Connecticut for Cemetery Saturday. And we met a fascinating individual last week, Mr. Colonel Benjamin Talmadge up in Litchfield. And today we have some fascinating folks to introduce you to. Every cemetery Saturday, we are going to local Connecticut cemeteries and introducing you to the people and families that have brought us here today, some of their fascinating stories, their graves. And Cedar Grove in New London is one of the most beautiful cemeteries that you could ever find yourself in, spanning centuries. And we're at the grave of a couple that I like to call a power couple, one of my favorite couples. And we're still in the Revolutionary period this week, so in the late 1700s, the late 18th century. And we're with a couple named the Hinmans, Captain Elisha Hinman and Miss Abigail Hinman. Now, I am on the side of Abigail right now, and I will introduce you to her shortly. But just on the other side, and we'll make sure that you see a full close-up of the monument after we talk about them a bit, is the description of the relic of Captain Elisha Hinman. Captain Elisha Hinman was one of the heroes that we probably hear least about from the American Revolutionary War. As it turns out, he was one of the first to be commissioned by the Continental Congress that was developing to be an officer of the Navy and one of the leaders of the Navy. He went on to capture British warships for the duration of the American Revolution. He would capture prisoners, he would supply guns to the Marquis de Lafayette, he would make sure that the Patriots were provided for, and he was fearless. And his biography could go on for days. What I think is perhaps one of the funniest things I learned about Captain Elisha Hinman is that he was once captured as a prisoner himself. And the imprisonment lasted only 5 days because he was good at talking and good at what he did. He bribed those that imprisoned him and made his way out, and then continued to capture more of the redcoats. So he would have been an individual I would have liked to encounter had I been on the same side as him. But definitely, if I hadn't been, I would not have wanted to encounter him. He likely got a lot of his smarts growing up. He started going out to sea and working on ships at the age of 12. He got his first job as a sea captain at age 20. So he knew the water well, and coming down here to New London was a natural fit. And his wife, she was as fearless and fierce as he was. In a lot of ways, I think she's the star of the story in my heart because of her sass, and I identify with that, and you may as well. And that's Ms. Abigail Hinman. And we can see right here on her grave, I want to give you an idea of what a good person she is, even though I'm going to tell you her sassy story. Her grandsons, who had this grave monument built here, had put upon here that she was charitable to the poor and a true friend to the distressed. She died as she lived, beloved and esteemed for her many amiable qualities and virtues. And they go on to say a pure Christian. So we know she was of pure heart. Her and her husband did what they thought was right in fighting for the freedom of this country in the American Revolution. So Abigail couldn't fight as the wonderful Navy man and captain that her husband was. But in some ways she did. And it happened right here in New London. So some of you may or may not be familiar with a figure that's become a bit of a villain in New England history and in U.S. history. And he's from not far away from where I'm standing right now, a town called Norwich, Connecticut. This was a gentleman who did not start off as a villain by any circumstance. He started off as someone who didn't come from much, who worked his way into the military world because he was a man of little means, whose wife died when she was young, who had to take care of his family, and who was also forced to take care of his mother and siblings because his father was a drunk and unable to do so. So he was just a man trying to do his best by his family. He was a very good soldier. He would get stabbed in the leg and even rolled under the horse of the redcoat that stabbed him and took that man's life. He got promoted by George Washington over the years for some time. But then the promotion stopped, and this gentleman wasn't appreciated much for what he had done. When this happened, he went to the developing Congress and to George Washington requesting financial aid, to which they declined to give him. He requested promotions, which they declined to give him. It was at this point that he, who had already been talking with redcoats, courtesy of John Andre, who we mentioned in the Talmadge section last week, well, after he talked with them, he decided he was going to serve the Redcoat Army, and he became the great traitor that we know today as Benedict Arnold. So Benedict Arnold, shortly after he turned, came to New London, Connecticut. This region was one he was familiar with, and he thought it was prime for the taking, prime for attack, and it would also fill his emotional vengeance. Well, he came to New London, and Captain Elisha Hinman was not here at his home with Abigail. As you can tell, he was quite busy on the front lines, and no one wasn't expecting an attack here in New London. But Benedict Arnold and 1,600 redcoats sailed forth down the Thames River between New London and Groton. 800 of them stormed on this side of the river into New London, and the other 800 stormed into Fort Griswold, where there was a fierce battle that was led between the redcoats and Colonel Ledyard and the Patriot defenders, leading to almost 200 bloody deaths on the battlefield. It was a brutal day, and perhaps on one of our digital adventures we'll take you directly to that battlefield. But what happened here in New London? What happened with Abigail? Well, Benedict Arnold disembarked his vessel here in New London with 800 of the men, and their goal was to set fire to the city, or at least anything that held ammunitions or was a Patriot stronghold. And that's what Benedict Arnold said. He later claimed when the entire city went up in flames that he didn't realize how explosive gunpowder was. Regardless, as he makes his way into the city to begin setting blazes, he finds himself going by the Hinman household. And Abigail leaves the house. She recognized Arnold. She had known him from her childhood. She had met him. She had spent time in Norwich. And she came out and greeted him, and he was shocked to see someone he knew come out and confront him in such a manner. But after she greeted him, she said, "And just what do you think you're doing?" He was at a loss for words, and she could tell what he was doing. So she said, "You will not be setting fire to my house." He agreed and even apologized to Abigail that he would not go after a friend's household in that way. And she said, "Very well, and you will not be setting fire to the homes of my friends either." Mr. Arnold took the list that Abigail then provided him of her friends' homes and agreed not to burn them down. Of course, some of his soldiers would go on to do so, but he agreed that he would not. So Abigail, she's not done yet. She came out, addresses this major general of the Redcoat Army, shows fearlessness. Her husband's not there. No one's home. And then she goes back into the house as Mr. Arnold prepares to leave her property. She sees her husband's musket is by the door. She grabs it. She runs back out the door, sees that Arnold's back is still turned, and fires the musket directly at him. It makes a loud pop as it echoes in the air, and as the shot goes right over his shoulder, barely missing him. Oh no, she quickly held the musket behind her back as Arnold turned his face to look toward her, where the shot had come from. And he said, "What was that? From where did that come?" She pointed in a direction opposite herself and said, "From that way." He thanked her and went in search of whoever had shot him, who he could not believe to be Abigail. Now, that legend has been told over the years and is true. It comes directly from her family. Her daughter was the first to tell the legend. Her daughter did take some storytelling liberties when she told it to the New York Times when she was an elderly woman herself. And what she told the New York Times is that she ran into the house, climbed to the roof of her house, shot at him from the roof, ran back downstairs, and came up with a cover story that it was a broken chair that made the noise. We know that Arnold would have known the difference between a broken chair and a gunfire, and that Abigail and all her skirts probably didn't make it to the top of the house. But what does not change is that she shot at Arnold. She deterred him, and she stood up for her friends and her family. She perhaps, with her husband, had this same fierce loyalty, and that's what drew them to each other. Without them, southeastern Connecticut, or Connecticut as a whole, would be different, and so would the American Revolution. I love this story because we often hear of the men that are off fighting, and I appreciate them so much for that. And Captain Elisha Hinman, I read his biography and I thought, oh my goodness, how did I not know all this about him prior to me reading to this? How did we not have a movie about him? But we don't often hear the stories of the women that did these remarkable things, the couples that tackled these things together, the first power couples of the country. And Elisha and Abigail are absolutely that. Fearless, brave, making sure to stand up for what is right even when it's difficult. And they are people that I always feel that we can channel and use during this time. As you think of Abigail and Elisha, I want to introduce you to their grave before it rains too heavily here. This lovely monument was not initially built when they passed away. The two stones that we filmed earlier in the segment are where they were buried. And they had children, 3 to be exact. And one of the children, Hannah Hinman, who ends up telling their story to the New York Times, had sons. And 2 of the sons who grew into adulthood, one perished as an infant, and his marker is here as well. They were the ones that built this memorial for their grandparents and for their mother. And those would be known as James and Thomas Day. And they were the ones that built this beautiful memorial. And if we look at it here, we see that we have Abigail on this side, wife of Captain Elisha Hinman. And as we look to the top, what we see is a big nod to the naval career of Captain Elisha Hinman. We see the pistol up there, we see the mast, and we see the rope. Rope also being a sign of eternity, but here we know it's much more military created. And as we make our way to the front of the monument, we see, of course, the military emblem with the name Hinman on it at the top. And then we see Captain Elisha Hinman's U.S. Navy description as we go down. It says, U.S. Navy, a patriot of the Revolution. People always say, there were, commanders in this sort of Navy by the Continental Congress. There absolutely were. And there were others in New London as well. And as we come to this side and we look up once more at the beautiful monument on top, you can really see the 2 masts with the flag. And the flag, as we come in this direction, past the sword that's going through the wreath, we see exactly 13 stars, a nod to the colonies at the time, which I think is quite lovely. So a beautiful monument indeed. And after I say goodbye, we'll make sure we do one more close-up of their original burial places. But I want to thank you for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed the stories of Captain Elisha Hinman and Abigail Hinman, and I hope when you are able to come out and about safely that you can come and meet them. And I encourage you, when you are able to do so, to visit cemeteries such as this. Find your ancestors, find your local heroes. The stories are endless, and it brings you such joy to find them. This is a great activity. Now, next week, we are going to take a bit of a jump in time when we do our cemetery Saturday. We are going to go up towards central Connecticut and go to a different time of war here. So the American Revolution is one that I wrote about, but there are other notable wars and heroes and families that were affected. And we're going to take a jump just under 100 years into the Civil War next week. So that's your teaser for that. Civil War in central Connecticut. Where will we be? Who will we meet? Someone you know? Or someone you never heard of. And we will also be visiting a variety of places as we embark through Connecticut, and hopefully we'll be coming to a cemetery near you. Now, we have 2 other segments that we are doing free weekly here on Facebook Live, and that will later be uploaded to our YouTube and Instagram pages. If you would like, you can also tune in on Spooky Story Sundays at 8 p.m. as we tell a ghostly story from Seaside Shadows. And you can tune in on Witchy Wednesdays at 5:30, where we will be concocting different potions and salts and healing things over the cauldron fire that you can later purchase from us. So make sure you tune in for the free Witchy Wednesdays, Spooky Sundays, and of course Cemetery Saturdays, which I'm getting quite partial to. And we are conducting virtual tours. We just conducted one in downtown Mystic last night for $5, and we'll be doing a cemetery tour soon too. So stay tuned to announce that. If you'd like to tip for any of these sessions, we'll always have our tip information up, and we are ever so grateful. We hope you enjoyed this trip back in time to the 1700s. Remember Abigail and her fierceness, and remember Captain Elisha and his smarts, his wits, and his fortitude. And I think that if we channel the two of them, we can get through anything we're going together, including the current crisis. So we're going to give you some cemetery shots, a close-up of Abigail and Elijah's original burial, and happy Cemetery Saturday. Until next time.